Hello again, Chris Lee and Blayne Gilmer of Southeastern 14 here, ready to preview the Hugh Freeze Bowl. Ole Miss's trip to Auburn. In this one, Auburn is a 5.5-point underdog with a 60.5-point over-under as we do this Sunday night, making for a predicted final score of Ole Miss 33, Auburn 28. ESPN's FPI has Ole Miss by 8. SP Plus has Ole Miss by 7. Team rankings, Ole Miss by 10. Jeff Sagarin, Ole Miss by 7. So average that together, Ole Miss about an 8-point favorite between the 5 of those. Before we get to our analysis here, always a reminder, looking for sponsors, caroline.smith at southeastern14.com if you're interested. Blayne Gilmer, we got one team coming with the bye week, one team that couldn't score even much against LSU and couldn't stop the best offense in the conference, in LSU, no shame in that. The Tigers will now see another high-powered offense when they face Ole Miss on Saturday night.
Well, they could kind of get together at the 50, Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin before the game and say, "Hey, we couldn't stop them either," So they can commiserate with one another on that commonality of LSU just torching their defenses. But even with a bye week, there's been some injury problems with Ole Miss, and we'll get into that when we talk about the offensive side of the ball. And then Auburn, they're just searching for some identity, trying to get Hugh Freeze's RPO system going there with Philip Montgomery still calling plays and Hugh trying to decide if he's going to take over and all this kind of stuff. The quarterback play's just been abysmal, and it just no real threats on the outside. So it is going to be interesting to see this go back to Jordan-Hare Stadium. Always a great environment there, and it makes a difference. I mean, I don't know if it's something it's over top of an Indian burial ground or something funky, Chris, but there's some weird stuff that happens there in Jordan-Hare Stadium when games there, especially night games like this. So it'll be interesting to see that environment.
All right, let's break down the matchup when Ole Miss has got the ball versus Auburn's defense. The quick numbers for you. Scoring, Ole Miss 41.7, Auburn 18.2. Yards per play, Ole Miss 7.1, Auburn 5.2. Yards per running play, 5.4 to 4.8. Yards per passing play, 8.9 to 5.6. Ole Miss turning it over less than 1% of the time. Auburn forcing turnovers at a pretty elite level, 3.2% of the time. Ole Miss has found a running game a little bit more recently. Jaxson Dart has been tremendous as a passer. And Auburn doesn't generate a huge pass rush, just 10 sacks. Ole Miss is fair at protecting the quarterback, giving up 12 sacks. Look, Alabama's been the one team to stop Ole Miss, but Auburn's got a pretty good defense too. I'm interested to see how this one goes.
They do, and now this Ole Miss offense is going to be without one of its weapons, Jordan Watkins. During the bye week, he injured his hand and is going to be out for a while. So they're going to be without one of their main weapons there. 36 catches, 536 yards, a couple of touchdowns. He's had at least 4 receptions in every game for Ole Miss. And when you're talking about balance, right, we talk about balance run to pass, but also there's balance within your passing game of being able to target different options, Chris. And Jordan Watkins was really a good balance to Tre Harris over there on the other side. So now the question is, who is going to step up in Jordan Watkins' absence? Is it going to be Zachary Franklin, who they thought was going to be, all world transferring in from UTSA and hasn't really done much, so far? Is it going to be the young, very talented, very hyped up Aiden Williams? Will he take a step forward? Is it going to be Jalen Knox? So, I mean, there's lots of guys that could step up and try to take over some of that repertoire that Jordan Watkins filled out there. But then you're talking about Caden Priestcorn as well. So I'm sure that Lane Kiffin will have a plan for that, but it stinks to lose somebody to injury on a bye week. I mean, that is just never what you want as a coach, but they have found that running game a little bit more as of late. And yeah, I would just characterize that Auburn defensive performance against LSU as, hey, that's just like what everybody else sees when they face LSU, man. I mean, it's LSU, I think, is the best offense in the country, and I think Auburn just, they couldn't sustain drives offensively, so they kept their defense on the field for so many plays. I mean, you give 66 plays in today's time with the clock rules and stuff like that. That's just tough, especially against LSU. So I don't think you can take too much defensively from that performance. And now they get to go home and see, okay, how do we match up against Quinshon Judkins and Jaxson Dart and company?
Yeah, you talked about the receiving depth there between receiver and tight end. Ole Miss has just been beaten up all year. Priest-Corn, Harris, those guys have been in and out of the lineup. And the other thing is the running game. Ole Miss has not gotten what it wanted out of it. Ulysses Bentley at times has been the better back than Quinshon Judkins, I think. And I think they've changed blocking schemes since last year, which has probably had something to do with that, maybe over the bye week after they started getting some things clicked in the last couple of weeks. Maybe that takes hold a little bit more too.
Yeah, and then also this offense has not performed tremendously well on the road. I mean, you talk about earlier against Tulane, they pulled away in that one late on the road, but they only had 89 yards rushing in that game. Jaxson Dart did throw a pick in that game, had some missed throws. Michael Trigg, who's not with the team anymore, actually made a big play in that game, and then they were awful on the road against Alabama. So will they be able to get started early, get a fast start offensively against a Auburn defense that you pointed out with some talent there, especially if they're healthier on the back end. They've had some injuries there. Can they get anybody closer to getting healthy this week? That'll be interesting to see.
When Auburn's got the ball, Tigers averaging 29.6 points a game. Ole Miss allowing 23.8 yards per play, 5.4 for Auburn, 5.2 per Ole Miss for its defense. Rushing plays, Auburn 5.5 yards, Ole Miss 4.2. Passing plays, this is kind of gross. Auburn 5.3, Ole Miss giving up 6.2. Auburn also turning it over 2.4% of the time, while Ole Miss is getting turnovers at a 2% rate. Ole Miss, not one of the elite defenses in the league, but one thing the Rebels will do is get after the quarterback. 22 sacks. That's kind of been a little bit of a hallmark of Lane Kiffin's defenses. They're not great, but they will make some disruptive plays. Auburn just has not been able to get anything going offensively through the passing game, but at least they did snap the streak of 100-yard passers. They finally got one last week. Was it Ashford threw for 102?
102. There you go. Yeah. First time in 6 Power 5 games that a quarterback, a singular quarterback for Auburn, has went for 100 yards. So,
yeah, I mean, look, let's call it what it is. I don't know what Jarquez Hunter's status is, but even with them, Auburn's got its work cut out against anybody respectable defensively.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were watching that, and I was looking at things, and I realized that Jeremiah Cobb led him in rushes. And I remember watching that throughout the game, but didn't even notice it. I was watching it with no sound on, how you do with these SEC games when we're watching multiple of them and things like that. But one thing I've just noticed is that when it comes to the passing game, Chris, Peyton Thorne just lacks anticipation. He's not able to, be able to see a receiver coming open and get the ball there early enough for it to make the play develop. The RPO style of the offense hasn't come together. Hugh Freeze, even going into that LSU game in press conferences, talked about, hey, we've got to call the correct pass with the right run concept to be able to marry things up. And that's even been a struggle at times. So one thing with the whole Peyton Thorne, Robbie Ashford deal, I did see when Robbie Ashford came in and he did start the second half for Auburn, it seemed like there was a little bit more life in that offense. At least there was some opportunities to make some plays down the field, whether those receivers make them or not. But I think Robbie Ashford is a guy that gives this offense much more juice. I think if there is any kind of running back injuries that continue, we still don't know if Damari Alston, when he's going to be back with his shoulder. He's questionable. Is there any kind of injury to Jarquez Hunter, all that kind of stuff. I think the added dimension of Robbie Ashford's legs could really help you, and you're going to need to find a way to be better on third down. Chris, they were 3 of 12 on third down, and that's just not going to cut it, especially when you're on the road like they were last week. Now at home, maybe they'll be a little bit better. But Chris, we talk about some of these advanced metrics, right? And we talk about predicted points added on a per play basis. Well, Chris, the average for the league is about 0.29. So for every play, the result of every play, it's going to, end up getting you about 0.3 of a point, right? Auburn is abysmal in that category, Chris. The worst in the league, 0.166 predicted points added per play. Just not getting it done. And then Ole Miss has been, they've caused a lot of havoc. They've been in people's backfields, and they've played pretty aggressively. Now they were, susceptible at times to Arkansas, but hey, we figured out that Arkansas is like Nebraska of 2 years ago, right? They may end up being like the best 8-9 loss team in the league. They keep losing games by one possession. So Ole Miss, I think, is playing a lot better defensively this year. We'll see how that carries out on the road.
Wanted to correct the mistake I made. It was actually Peyton Thorne that threw for 102 yards and not Robbie Ashford, although it took him 23 attempts to get there, which sort of explains Auburn's offensive season. But anyway.
Inefficiency.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. A couple things before we wrap it up. Ole Miss getting 65 yards of penalties per game. I believe that is the worst in the league. Sometimes those are things that pop up on the road, which Ole Miss is. And Auburn only averaging 42 yards of penalties. That's one of the better marks in the league. SP Plus special teams rankings. Ole Miss is 24th in the country. Auburn 34th. All right, prediction time. Blayne, I just cannot pick Auburn until I see it score. But let's point out, a couple of weeks ago, I didn't see much of a path to victory against Georgia either. Auburn made that a 7-point game. I'm still going Ole Miss here, but what do you think?
Yeah, I just think when it comes down to it, if Auburn cannot extend drives, and that's kind of been part of their problem, right? Not being able to convert on third down, not being able to have the passing game necessary to be able to get some explosives there. They're really, really good in terms of creating some explosives in the run game. But I think even with some of the banged up stuff that they've got going on, on the defensive side, it's even more imperative that they find ways to keep Ole Miss's offense off the field. I don't know that they're going to be able to do that, because one thing, Chris, is when you're talking about the defense for Ole Miss, I mean, they find ways to hold people to field goals once they get inside, when people get inside their territory. And Chris, their havoc rate, 24% of the time, Ole Miss is causing havoc on defense. They're going to get after Auburn. I think Ole Miss wins and covers this game.
All right, we are predicting every single SEC game involving FBS teams. Best way to get those, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Those things help our analytics. For Blayne Gilmer, I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching our preview of Ole Miss and Auburn.